Knowing the essential from the unessential is quite a remarkable and absolutely necessary quality to have for every practitioner on this path. Knowing the essential from the unessential. We see this in the Dhammapada verses, where the Buddha just briefly puts into words such a powerful statement, one that brings into view the unshakability of this thing called seeking one's own good in life. Years ago, I read somewhere a story which has stayed with me for, well, all these decades. It involves a young man who is sent off to a far distant land to gain higher knowledge, higher education. So his parents, who happen to be poor, they give away most of their belongings to ensure a safe passage for their son, their only son, to go off to this far distant land, to this apparently very well-known educational institution, higher education, a university, if you like. And after many, many years, the son, who's now, I guess, at a point where he might be considered having several PhDs, decides to come back home. So he gathers all his diplomas, all his scriptures, and heads back home. Finally, he gets to this large body of water, and he finds this old man who is his passage, in a sense. So he hires him to take him to the other side, at which point he would be able to get a lot closer to his home and walk there, pretty much. So he says, could you take me there? And the man says, of course. So he jumps on board. It's just him and this old man. And now he's no longer a young man. I guess you can say he was in his 30s or so. And as the man is just rowing the boat by himself, he's, on the other hand, is lavishly sitting there. He turns to this old man and says, old man, do you know anything about mathematics? The man says, I'm sorry, I don't. What is that? And he says, you lost over 20% of your life. The man says, okay. Next, he turns and says, old man, do you know anything about business and economics? The man says, I don't know, my son. I don't know. He says, there goes another 15% of your life. Wasted, down the drain. He says, do you know anything about astronomy? Looking at the stars above. The man says, I'm sorry, I don't. He says, there goes another 10% of your life gone to waste. Meanwhile, the storm breaks. And there's like the waves are getting choppier and choppier. And all of a sudden, it's really unsettling. And the boat is barely keeping steady. And the old man turns to him and he says, my son, do you know how to swim? And the man says, no, And he says, there goes your entire life. Knowing the essential and distinguishing it from the unessential allows us to have this sustainability of peace, and understanding. And there's a distinction between understanding and just collecting knowledge, collecting data. Being able to quote some verses here and there, and counting or placing our entirety of our practice upon that capacity of knowledge or belief in some cases. One day, one of the students of the Buddha, having gotten to a certain point in his practice, he says, this is beyond hearsay, this is beyond tradition, this is beyond belief, or even considering the reasonable factors, meaning just using deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, logic, critical thinking skills. It's beyond that, beyond speculations as well. It's beyond tradition, it's beyond how much of a clout, celebrity status a teacher has. It's simply about knowing and seeing. Knowing and seeing that one can experience Nibbana in this path. It's about knowing and seeing. Notice, it's the person who knows, who understands, who sees for oneself. And that's why the Buddha has this beautiful term in the qualifiers for the Dhamma. He says, ehipassiko. Come, test it out yourself. See it for yourself. There's no need for blind belief. There's no need for accumulating knowledge and then counting, just like that man. Our survival basically being dependent on these numbers of PhDs that he had collected, which were now floating on the surface with him dropping down below the lake's surface, dead, drowning. So it's so easy for us to be drowning in our egos, drowning in our, well, I know this many techniques. I can sit for this many hours. Again, all these things are crucial at one point or another. Working collectively, however, they have to be placed in the lap of one's experience of it in connection to one's personal life, everyday life, interactions with the world. And that's why I love this story, because the old man says, my son, do you know how to swim? Because your life depends on it. The Buddha had a term for this. He called it samvega, urgency. Urgency is another definition for knowing the essential from the unessential. Because every one of us is here today because of, well, we still have some credit to be occupying this body in this shape and not dead, pretty much. And what are we doing with that? Would be a question that the Buddha might ask. Am I too busy collecting information? Am I too busy collecting junk? Relationships. Again, relationships are good. Like everything, like food is good. Knowledge of the suttas, understanding of the suttas, it's all good. Necessary, in fact, even. However, how much credence are we giving it? How much of a priority are we giving to those? And that's how I understand when we say meditation is practice, practicing of life. It's an ongoing practice. So if a person comes to me and says, oh, I'm going into this jhana, this, that jhana, or I am able to maintain a long sitting with my object of meditation for hours, and I said, okay, wonderful, wonderful. When you come out of your meditation, from your sitting meditation, and you're engaging with your neighbor, with your dog, with the situation in the world, at work, how much of that loving kindness, or whatever your object is still there? You can still hear it resonating, still there, despite the frustrating situations that might be taking place around you. Are you sucked into that? If not, if you're not sucked into that, and you're able to still be with that object, whatever it may be, the breath or whatever, so basically your mind is tranquil and equanimous, you're actually on your way to develop a deeper level of understanding, because it's becoming part of your life. That's how I understand meditation to be inseparable from every single heartbeat that you experience. Inseparable. It's not something that we do at a certain time. We engage in at a certain time after the storm is over. No. No. I mean, the body's metabolism is ongoing all the time. If it stops, the person is dead. The circulatory system is working all the time. So how come the awareness system isn't working all the time? That is the essential element of wisdom, which distinguishes this path from anything else, which I like to call it the Buddha's path. I don't even call it Buddhist path. I call it the Buddha's path, his path. It's not even Theravada, it's not Mahayana, it's not this or that. It's the Buddha's path. This in itself gives us the sense of unshakability versus knowledge or belief or tradition. Oh, I belong to this tradition. Oh, I belong, whatever. No, it's the person's unshakability because they have seen it in their life. They have tested it, tasted it. They know it for themselves. If I go for the life of me and try to give this person $1 million or give him titles or whatever, or evidence as to prove otherwise than what he knows or she knows or experiences, the person will just shake their head with so much compassion and say, you're barking on the wrong tree. You know, it's like, this is not, you know, I know for myself. I know it's true. And this knowing, which is another word for seeing, is one that comes along when the meditation practice is with you. More and more and more, especially in those hot moments of your life, when you really desperately want to not be mindful and just be sucked into whatever the six senses are bringing to you, whatever the mind is conjuring up. Beliefs, traditions, knowledge even, or the unessential, the way I kind of began discussing this, is another form of the familiar. The familiar. Every time we take a breath in and breath out, so long as we are with it, if we're genuinely there with the breath and not holding on to or chewing on, like I was saying earlier, chewing on yesterday's fare, yesterday's food, whether it's memories or whatever, kind of dwelling on that, on those things that happened. Oh yes, do you remember? Yeah, that was nice. Oh, that was horrible. Oh, or conversely going into the future and trying to build something out of thin air. As long as these two things are not happening and you're really, really there with the breath, or your object of meditation, you're really feeling the radiating of metta, what you're essentially doing is simply saying goodbye to the familiar. Goodbye to the familiar, which takes tremendous amount of courage. But the mind doesn't like that. It likes to latch onto the familiar, whether it's an idea, a concept, a memory, a sensation, a certain experience, perhaps, a certain teacher, a certain way of thinking. Still, it's the familiar. So it's seeking refuge, it's seeking safety within the familiar. Meanwhile, every single cell in our bodies is going through tremendous change. There is not even a single atom that is steady, that is fixed, that is non-changing. Yet we want to create this alternate reality for ourselves, and we spend a whole lifetime trying to do it, even though every single experience tells us otherwise. However, the mind likes to go back and say to us, look, I have this friendship, I have that friendship, look at my role in life, I have this, I have that, all of which are just, it's a ruse, it's a fake mirage that we like to tell ourselves to simply sustain our sense of peace and protection, because we're deeply, deeply, deeply afraid to face the unfamiliar. But that's what life is always greeting us with. When all this nonsensical justifications or reasons or latching on to this idea, this thought, this belief, this way of thinking, all these identifications, which the Buddha addressed by his third, declaration of anatta. That's what I understand anatta to be talking about. Pulling the rug from the sense of identifications, plural. And to see it courageously with your eyes by using a method that allows you to see dukkha for dukkha's, for whatever it is, dukkha. The suffering, the sense of dissatisfaction, unsatisfactoriness, this pain. And then offering us the tools to address dukkha and relinquish ourselves from these shackles that, before anything else, they are self-imposed due to our ignorance and our refusal to consider otherwise. And we refuse it simply because of, hey, it's familiar. At least I know what it is. Versus, let me learn how to do, some freestyle swimming. Let me go and learn how to swim like that man who missed out on. Let me see what this old man is trying to say. Looking back at the most essential, which is gaining a sense of peace in the mind whereby wisdom arises and we see things for what they are. Yatha bhutang pajanati, the Buddha calls it. Seeing things how they come to be, not necessarily outside of us. I figured out how you function, how this system is working outside of me. No, the first and foremost, the most important part is, to my understanding, based on what I have seen from the Buddha's teachings and through my practice, it's all about seeing how things come to be related with my understanding of this whole process. And why am I still stuck in samsara, this cycle of continued rebirths, continued cycles of suffering? Again, you don't have to believe in rebirth, whatever. You just have to look at your simple, one single day out of the 365.5 days of the year. Just one day. See how many cycles you're going through. The mind wants to latch onto one thing and then it's disappointed, but then it quickly jumps to something else. And then something else. Seeking the familiar. Meanwhile, life itself is otherwise. It's a series of unknowns, but that is why we grow. And when you look at a tiny little stem, the tiny little, what will turn into a tree, and it pushes through the concrete, sometimes the concrete, the soft tissued biological organism, pushing through thick, thick layers of concrete, and it trustingly pushes and pierces through and cracks it. And it goes up seeking the freedom of the skies against gravity, pushing itself up, 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 up. It's going against it's kind of jumping into the unknown. You might call the ground, the soil where the roots are grabbing hold of themselves to support itself. Possibly the familiar, the known. But the action is happening all over here, above the ground. So much trust. Saying goodbye to the familiar so that life can begin. So that knowledge and wisdom could arise. And so my encouragement here is to allow yourselves, especially starting with the context of your practice, your meditation, the sitting practice. Let's narrow it down to that. Whether you can approach it with that mindset of saying goodbye to the familiar, that means not holding on to yesterday's experiences or some time ago, how it felt, or I would like to really experience peace or whatever. Let me just sit, apply the techniques, and just be open. Being open is, to my understanding, saying goodbye to the familiar. And that's when life begins. Every millisecond of your life. And then you cannot help but do the wholesome thing, kusala, kamma, whether it's through thoughts, through speech, or through physical action. Because nothing is slipping by you. You're there. It really doesn't make a difference when you're sitting meditating or when you're walking outside for throwing the trash away. It's always there. And that's, to me, is like an awakened living. It becomes part of right lifestyle of the Eightfold Path. Because first and foremost, it's based on right view. So I would like to offer those thoughts to you today. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts, questions, and comments you might have. Yes?
So I have a question.
Yes?
So there are times when I realize that I am with the object of meditation while I am in a conversation, say with my family, but I want the other person to feel good. Like I see a frown on Dad's face, so I want to make him come out of that. He's always tense. So, and I've lost my object of meditation and I've gone into the familiar, and then I say, oh no, I got to stay back. So how do I correct this?
The thing which I love about, thank you for your question, first of all. It's a very real example of how we can find an opportunity to practice metta in action. Again,
Yes.
metta itself at this point, I don't necessarily care about. It's just the object of meditation. It could be the breath, because you might have actually lost the breath awareness also. That might be the case. But anyhow, using your example, there's a few things there. I want him to not frown. I want him to smile. I want him to kind of go synchronized with my energy, with my state of being, because it feels like that clam that has a grain of sand stuck into its shell, and now it feels very uncomfortable. It tries to, it's very uncomfortable, because this person, when they're frowning, is in essence is pulling you out of your, for lack of a better phrase, blissed out state. These could be going on. Also, remember I said something about sustaining our peace.
Yes.
Another word for safety. You know, if you look at us as humans, as animals, if you look at an animal in a certain way, they will feel intimidated or feel comfortable with you. That premise is all throughout biological organisms as I know it, especially with human beings. So when a person is frowning, that's also an indication that this is an unsafe environment for me, versus a smile. A smile indicates many things. One, it indicates that you are happy, the person is happy, they're experiencing joy. There's a sense of acceptance there for you. There's a sense of trust, and you can bring your guards down a little bit. So, and it's comfortable. So these also can be tied into our need to go ahead and say, I need this person not to be frowning. I don't feel safe. I want to feel safe. I want to feel happy. And perhaps even, I want him to also feel what I'm feeling. That's the other factor, especially with karuna or compassion.
Yes.
And then there's the other thing. The thing that involves, you know, I see you. I see you frowning. Perhaps something has happened to you. Can I be able to allow you to be in that space? Can I allow myself to just let you be in that space? Instead of me wanting to jump in and fix you, quote unquote, fix you.
Yes.
Because we're all fixers. We all try to fix something. So when you're coming from that, and in therapy, there's this thing of using I statements, meaning, which is another form of, when I use the example of pointing the finger away from you, and there's 3 fingers pointing back. This is another form of that. So instead of saying to the person, or in your mind towards the person, you're frowning again. Because of you, this is just bringing me down. Versus, what is happening to me when I'm seeing frown? So this is very subvocal speech. So you're saying this to yourself in your thoughts. You're bringing the attention back to you. Why am I all agitated? I don't know what they faced before they walked in through the door. What do I have control over? My reaction to this situation. Okay, this is when you gain back the control over your own kamma, your own actions. Starting with your thoughts. Starting with the second is your speech. This is samma vacha. This is the harmonious speech, right speech that we're doing subvocally to yourself. And then you do the action. Continue to smile to this person. Because that's the capacity that we have. And then you can be creative, I would suggest, like, is everything okay? Instead of, How come you're always frowning? Boom, judging them. Now the person is even more shut down and maybe even aggressive. So I would offer those thoughts, and I hope that helps you.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you.
Yes. Oh, can't hear you.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Bhante. I had a question about memory because recently I saw a documentary on people that were over 100 years old, and haven't quite reached there yet. But they said, "Oh well, it's my memories that sustain me and keep me, kind of keep me going because most of my family is gone."
Mm.
And then when I was young, I was reading this woman named Suzanne Langer, a psychologist, and she said, "Well, okay, memory is a way of kind of imagining. It's good because you can imagine what happened in a different way. And for me, especially during these times of sort of uncertainty and crisis, memory is a useful escape, I guess. And I think without memories, I couldn't really live in the present or the future. So I was wondering, I think I maybe misunderstood what you're saying, but I'm not sure how to, what's the role of, how one should deal with memory.
Thank you for, well, it's an important question. And oftentimes it's not even addressed or asked. We function with memory, right? We have short-term, we have long-term memory, and there's new discoveries, new research being done constantly on this. I personally have wondered and thought about, okay, what is memory? What are all these things? And how much credence am I giving it? Because I would remember a certain thing and then run it by my sister and brother back in the day. And they would look at me stunned and they would say, that never happened. I was like, what do you mean? It's so real. It's so, I could feel it viscerally. It's real. I was, I think, like 5 or 6, something like that. And then you see how fickle it is. How individuals, because we latch on to memory, and memory, I like some teachers, some Dhamma teachers' interpretation of memory as sanya, which is one of the 5 khandhas, or associations. Oftentimes, memory becomes the very mortar, the very cement with which we try to construct for ourselves this persona. This is who I am. This is mine. This is myself. Atta. And then the people around us will also use those memories to kind of validate their relationship. And it also helps us to feel 3-dimensional. But again, it is such a transitory thing. It doesn't have roots. Memories don't have roots, if you want to use an image. They don't. Why? Because they change. They can be easily colored. You can go in through a hypnosis session, boom, the memories change. You can add new memories, in fact, which is dangerous. Wow, in the wrong hands, right? But what if the moment comes when we lose the memory? When I was 21, well, my mom was suffering from ovarian cancer, and she was stage 4, and she was on the last bit of life that she had, and she was suffering for 4 years. I might have mentioned this before, but she looked at me. I walked into her room taking some medicine to her and just wanted to check on her. She looked at me stunned. And the worst that a child could experience, I guess I ended up experiencing that day, because she looked at me, her face changed as if she saw a stranger walk in, and she pointed the finger at me and said, "Who are you? Who are you? Get out." And she was so loud that my dad walked in and he said, "Sweetie, this is our son." She didn't remember. She insisted I leave the room. Wow. She was only 47. But I mean, I still get, goosebumps when I remember this, as you can imagine. It's powerful. But that also made me think about memories. I mean, how reliable are these things? So to me, memories, the way I see them, this is the capacity that I have in trying to answer your question. The way I see memories is that they could be like a stepping stone, a rung on a ladder, not to be attached to, but they can take me somewhere. I can compare notes, look at myself, certain time past, and see where I am now, comparing and contrasting. So it's a wonderful compare and contrast tool. However, I find more reliability when I'm saying goodbye to the familiar, or at least not being so enmeshed in it and saying, this is my life, this is my world. Because I don't know where the next breath is coming from or whether it will come. But somehow we have taken it for granted that it will come. So that's how I would try to address your question. I hope it's useful somehow.
No, it's useful. I mean, it's sort of like being on a skiff or a boat. It's moving. You're moving. Well, you can't really jump off. You have to go with the flow, but you should adjust your body accordingly so you won't fall over, especially if you can't swim like me. So anyway, thank you.
Yes, and that's a brilliant example that you just offered, because it also indicates the urgency we have. Okay, as long as the memories are working fine, the brain is functioning, let me make the most out of this life. And this is where the Buddha's mention of urgency, Samvega, comes in. I don't know how long I will have these memories. Being able to access the stories from the Buddha's life, interactions with other bhikkhus, how other human beings have dealt with situations similar to mine, etc., in order for me to be inspired enough to take a certain action that is wholesome. I don't know if my memory is going to be affected enough in the future where I would be completely doing things haphazardly. I don't know, but at least for now, I can purify the mind to a certain point where, whether there's memories or not, it will find itself falling back into the state of equanimity, which is something that memories have nothing to do with. Upekkha, because it's an experiential. When we talk about ehipassiko, it's so deep that it goes beyond the limits of sanya. It's very experiential. You feel it in the body, and the body always keeps the score. You might forget trauma mentally, cognitively, but the body will always remain able to remember it. That will never be lost. Memories might.
Thank you.
You're all. Yes?
Thank you, Bhante. And thank you for the question. I was realizing that as the question was asked about memories, there was the word escape. And I relate to that so much in the past, especially, daydreaming would be a common way for me to escape dukkha in the moment. So remembering experiences, usually, pleasant ones. Oh, this happened, and then I went to this place, and then I did that. How wonderful. So, of course, all of that happens in the present at the expense of the present moment, because when do you remember? Now. Or when do you plan for the future? Now. So your senses are open to life, but your mind is reflecting on those past sense objects, which basically what memory is, objects that you experienced in the past, and now you're awakening them. So I think that there's always that craving element with memory. There's always a response to the memories, you know, whether they were pleasant ones, so there's sadness for not having them anymore, or they were unpleasant ones, there is that re-experiencing of dukkha or aversion may come up. So there's always, the defilements are always there when there's memory. I think they don't happen in a vacuum. There's always a reaction to them in the present moment. I think presently when I catch myself proliferating, there's also the papanja factor, you know, thoughts, one leads to the other, images come up and responses, reactions in the body. So I think it's a wonderful mechanism ultimately for the practice, examining the memories, how they come up, when they come up, what happens when they come up, and whether or not there is craving a certain way of reacting to the memories. So thank you for that question.
And thank you for your elaboration. I appreciate that. And I know we all do. Absolutely. Yes.
I just want to say it's so nice to hear you say that do not put that much stock in memory, because I think I've told Russell several times, I say, well, when I don't have, if I suffer from Alzheimer and I no longer have memory, that's when I don't want to live. You know, I just feel that, you know, what's the point if I can't even recognize my son? So the example you give was very touching, and what it crosses my mind is that if we have been practicing metta, even if your mother doesn't recognize you as a son, she will not ask you to go away. So I thought, well, maybe even when I don't have memory, and when I see my son, I'll still smile at him, and that's okay. Then you know, you don't have to pull the plug on me, you know. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a brilliant way of looking at it. Thank you. Thank you. Any other thoughts, questions? We're still that fetus, you know. For 9 months or so, we tried so hard to be protected, to be safe. We come out and we're still wanting to be safe. Sometimes even being in a fetus form. I just realized something the other day that I can share here, that PTSD does not have to happen when we're out of the womb. PTSD can also occur when we are in the womb. Pain, dukkha, is experienced. But the fetus is the closest thing that we can come, or an embryo to, not an embryo maybe, some people argue, but a fetus to a human being. And then they come out and we call them a different thing, a child, an infant, etc., a human being, a man, a woman, whatever. But we can identify. But this entity, this person is always looking for some sense of safety, despite the fact that we are always in situations that are unknown to us. When the mosquito comes in and lands on you, we didn't ask for it. The way the breeze hits the hair, your face, the way a person might greet you with a frown or a nasty racist remark, or completely ignores you, as if you don't even exist, even if you're a 6'5" person standing wearing burgundy, bald head. We don't know. So in a sense, we are seeking comfortable environments for ourselves. whether it's making sure the memories, especially the good memories, by the way, we are very selective after all, right? We like the good memories to stick around. Bad memories, they can have a carte blanche to get out as soon as possible and never to return. Comfortable areas to sit, relationships the same way. So we are seeking that sense of comfort. And we take that mindset, that sense of longing with us to our practice, which the Buddha called it also craving, tanha. We're seeking that. Of course, I'm not saying to go ahead and sleep on a bed made of nails or cause harm to oneself. No, but being smart about our choices. And that's where the Buddha made a clear distinction between wholesome and unwholesome, skillful and unskillful, kusala, akusala, in our thoughts first. In our thoughts. And then our speech, and then our actions. And the testing ground for this is the meditation. It's like the gym, if you want to call it, to practice. So, any thoughts, any questions, or things that might have popped? Okay. Yeah, yes.
Just briefly, I wanted to share that Bhante, your talk today made me see with some clarity the differences between, or what we mean by higher education in our modern world, and what the Dhamma may represent as a form of education. It helped me see the difference between content and quality. With education, the way I, for example, experienced it, more about accumulating and knowing, and that image that you gave of a young man having all these various fields of knowledge. And on the other hand, we have the Dhamma, which experientially teaches about ourselves, our body, our mind, life, relationships. So there's qualities that we experience and live. So your talk helped me see clearly what we mean by education today and what the Dhamma really educates one about.
Yes, just to offer a caveat to that, even the Dhamma can become like the way you described higher education, when a person just accumulates, or memorizes. It's like eating something but not digesting it, letting it go through you straight away. But it really replenishes one's ego to oneself, and then they have plenty of things to kind of count on and throw these verses at people. Yes, the Buddha said this. So that is the thing which we need to be careful of. Like I mentioned it some time ago, the Buddha himself, or at this time, many of the bhikkhus probably knew maybe one or two verses, or maybe one or two suttas, unlike, Venerable Ananda. And that was sufficient for them to attain arahantship. So we can easily be sucked into accumulating. Okay, it's not learning about quantum physics or mathematics or news or whatever, but you're accumulating information from the suttas. Even that. So it has nothing to do with the suttas. Dhamma is not in the suttas. It can be inspired by the suttas, of course. Ignorance is not in the suttas. It's not in the book. The kileshas, the defilements, are not in the suttas. Devadatta, the Buddha's cousin, brother-in-law who wanted to kill him, doesn't exist in the suttas. Ultimately, they're here inside oneself. I hope I'm not coming across as too esoteric or metaphysical, but it's just trying to bring the reality of the Dhamma into your own individual personal experiencing of it. Experiencing of it. And then you might know maybe one verse or not. You might know just that verse that the Buddha says in Dhammapada. Seeing the essential as essential instead of seeing the unessential as essential, which is a lot of what we see around us within Buddhist circles and all over. The courage is what we need to be bringing into our lives, to take that, whatever we know, and just dig in, jump in. And don't eat the recipe and think that you're feeding yourself. Make it and eat it yourself. Yes.
Thank you, Bhante. When you said this requires courage, I was thinking a lot about what you said earlier part of the talk about come and see for yourself. And I just feel like I think what has made this path challenging for me is that the entire way I was raised, my whole life, of what it means to be spiritual, right? To learn, to do things is not helpful, right? So having been, like, I was raised Catholic, right? So it's a lot of doctrines and memorizing doctrines and beliefs and understanding the arguments, right? And that's not helpful on this path, right? It was, growing up Catholic meant, believing without seeing, right? Trusting in the authority of the hierarchy of the church, right? And even that took, you have to learn how to be that way. But now I'm on this path and that's not helpful, right? In this world, to get by, like, you have to debate and prove yourself or establish yourself, right? That you really know what you're talking about. You can memorize all these things, and that's not helpful in this path. Relying on intellect alone is not helpful on this path. So when you said this requires courage, it just made me think, like, my goodness, it's like going on a journey into a forest and you have no idea what's going to happen, because at least for me, like, all the tools that I've been raised with in my previous religious practice, in my academic training, my socialization in this country, being bicultural, all of that, like, none of that is particularly helpful when it comes to understanding what's happening in the mind, how is it responding to phenomenon, where is craving, how to identify craving, how to end craving. Like, nothing has prepared, I feel like nothing has prepared me to do that. And I think that's what makes it challenging for me. Like, nothing has prepared me for that. And when I try to think about it, I fall back into the thinking, into doctrines, into comparing, right? Well, how come Buddhists, well, Christians are happy too, blah, 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 blah. But they haven't, uprooted the defilements. And then I realized that's just another debate, blah, blah, blah. Who cares, right? So again, nothing has prepared me for this. And I know it works. It's been working, I should say, right? But, I think what makes it hard, again, it's just the fact that I don't feel like anything has really prepared me, or many of us, to actually engage this path in the way it invites us to engage.
Thank you for that very humanist way of looking at the current state of affairs. But as you said, nothing has prepared you. Instead of dwelling on that sentence, nothing has prepared us, which is part of memory again. What you're saying is that you are now preparing yourself on every single step that you're about to take. That demands courage, which you're manifesting. So long as you're not dwelling on the debating aspect, you're not bringing in that debating junk into your mind. And now you've just switched enemies, opponents, if you will. Instead of the Catholic Church or this religion or this tradition, now it can be the Buddha. No, the Buddha or the teachings or whatever, the teacher, the technique needs to prove itself to me that it's not that. Well, like I've given that example of saying that, parents had said, running from the rain only to be caught in a hailstorm. Instead, being okay with, you know what? Yes, I was not prepared. And most of the subjects they teach us at school, I consider to be useless if they are not augmented by other subjects. How do we relate with one another? How can we talk with one another? How can I respect another person? How can I make money? Even, that's also utilitarian, but it's important. We talk about other things. And more valid, vital subjects are being dropped, like history, world history for schools. So anyhow, coming back to this moment and looking at, yes, I know I'm not prepared, but let me prepare myself. If it's just a sentence, seeing the essential as essential, if that's it, if that supports you enough to have the courage to take that step forward, go for it. You do not need a Library of Congress to support you to take that step. That's all junk. Somebody else's thoughts about somebody else's assumptions. Yes. Oh.
Oh, I don't think Omero should throw the baby out with the bathwater, because all the other preparations, techniques, and skills, and whatever that I think he has, and capabilities have probably help him in his daily life and family life and other things, and in a way now there's some breathing space because he's already mastered all those things and pretty good. So now he can go a different way. But I don't think that those are necessarily useless. They're probably very practical skills as well. I'm sure Omero can swim, so that's great. I mean, so I don't think, wherever we're coming from, whether we're highly educated or not educated in a formal way, and I think it's misused, the idea of education being only within a school, within four walls, and taught by PhDs. I learned so much just in a park talking with people. I mean, a different kind of learning, but there's formal education and a lot of informal education, which I think prepares us for for this particular moment.
Thank you. Well said. Okay, I think we're at that time again. So I ask if you could also join in sharing some merits. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share in the merits that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share in these merits. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you for joining. Brilliant questions. Thank you for sharing. And I look forward in seeing you in the next time.
Thank you so much. Nice to see everyone.
Please be safe and keep smiling, and enjoy the journey. And don't be afraid to be courageous. Don't be afraid to be courageous. Interesting. Take care. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good week.